Hello and welcome to our podcast on the flipped classroom and that all-important decision of whether to flip or not to flip. It seems like the latest rage in education is to be talking about this flipped classroom idea. It seems to be gaining some traction around the world and around American classrooms, and we just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about why one might do that and some of the positives and negatives of that. And then finally, if you decide to do something like this, what the heck do you do? So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these things. So before we start talking about what the flipped classroom is, let's revisit some important educational choices that we make and why those are important to students. And then we'll be able to talk about why flipping may be a way to reach those goals for both you and your students. The way I like to be talking about lesson planning and year-long planning is a model that I have stolen from my wife, who teaches at the local university, and she calls it TEMP, and that is an acronym for T, which is where we actually teach something very explicitly, E, where we provide examples of whatever is being taught, M is where we, the experts as teachers, would model the skill or the equation balancing or the reading strategy, whatever we are teaching. And then P is all of the levels of scaffolded practice we provide to students. And so, yes, it is a way to really heat up a lesson, but I think it's an important way for us to remember to take all of these scaffolding steps. Oftentimes we say something, assume kids know what it is, and then instantly throw them into practice. Unfortunately, we've potentially skipped some of these important steps for our learners. A way that I think about TEMP is that the TEMP progressions can be both vertical and horizontal. And what I mean by that is this. A vertical TEMP in my planning book would be something that is taken care of within a day or two. So for example, maybe a new way of balancing an equation in chemistry, a new way of implementing a formula in physics, a literary term such as the simile. Within a day or two, we could probably tell them what that is, so that's the T part. We could then show them examples. We could then model for them how we as readers may discover a simile, and then model how we think through the deeper meaning of that. And then finally, we could provide levels of practice for those students. Full group practice, moving to small group, moving to the individual and independent level. I don't think this is anything revolutionary in terms of lesson planning. We've heard this before through ed schools. They've called it gradual release or scaffolding, but I like the acronym that my wife has come up with that just reminds us to take all of these explicit steps. Especially as we move into the upper grades, move to more abstract ideas, we need to be more explicit with most students so that we can walk them through that and then gradually take away our support in the scaffolding process. I think too often we jump to the teaching part and then instantly go to the assessment part. I told you what a simile is. Now go through this difficult poem and find all the similes and tell me how that relates to the theme. I think we're missing some steps. I think TEMP will help us. The other way I think TEMP is important is not only in the vertical axis, but in the horizontal axis. And we need to be looking at our year-long progression. I tend to see these progressions around skills rather than pieces of content. So for example, the skills of reading, writing, or thinking. We can't give them the most difficult and abstract piece to read on day one. We have to teach them how to do it with concrete pieces, with shorter pieces, with pieces that have an obvious message, and then provide them opportunities to practice with more difficult, with more abstract, with more lengthy pieces. So while we may teach them a reading skill over 1 or 2 days, the modeling for that might also take 1 or 2 days, but then it's going to be circled back to throughout the entire year as we go from August to May.